All right, we're live on the Fireside PM podcast, and we're going to do a little bit of a role reversal. Wes Wu, one of former colleague of mine and a early Fireside PM live stream viewer, has agreed to turn the tables, and I can answer some questions as well. So, Wes, I'm going to hand it over to you, and thank you in advance for volunteering your time for this embryonic effort.
All right, Tom, thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me. It's exciting to chat with you again, and having watched a lot of these videos where you talk and you're in the interviewer seat. Uh, it's gonna be fun to flip it around, right? Because I think you're kind of our James Lipton from inside the actor studio, and I think there were some episodes to where the actor guests turned it around and interviewed James. So
There you go. I
this
need
is
my
gonna be.
little desk and my little note cards.
Hmm.
But
And
yeah,
get
look
those
forward to it.
zingers ready.
Yeah. Favorite word.
I'm gonna ask that. But yeah, I mean, just to start off, you've done a few of these interviews, and I don't think you've ever introduced yourself. So I know I'm familiar
Yeah.
with you. Probably some other folks are, but
Yeah.
tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah. I probably have not introduced. I mean, this whole podcast was a little bit like many things in my life. I was just like, hey, wouldn't that be cool? Let's just give it a shot. So yeah, my background, I'll try and give you like a brief summary. The Liang story starts in southern China before the Civil War, and my father's side of the family had very early success in the early 1900s in steel production in China, which was kind of like a new thing back then. And they made like safes, which was very, very opportune because the country had been shifting from coin-based currency to paper currency, so people were always concerned about stuff getting stolen or burned, and they had produced fireproof steel safes and had done really well. And then the mother side of the family, they were in politics, so they were like a province senator, my grand maternal grandfather. And so those two sides of the family were living large. And then what happened was the Chinese Communist Party started emerging, and they were not down with early industrialist families, nor nationalist government um, politicians. So, long story short, the communists won the Civil War, and a lot of people got kicked out, including my father and mother's side of the family. And so they escaped to Hong Kong, which at that time was a British colony. And then eventually they met and got married. And then they decided they were still concerned about mainland China's reach, and sought a new future in the land of opportunity and moved to the U.S. Around 1970. And then I was born a few years later in New Jersey, in a kind of suburban town outside of the New York City metropolitan area. Yeah, my dad was an engineer. He worked. He studied in Taiwan and in England and in Canada and England, civil engineering, and ended up working in New York City. His coolest project was probably some stuff for the NASA space shuttle program.
Wow.
Yeah, not the shuttle itself, just like the hangar and the transportation kind of rail system. But was important part of the infrastructure for the program. And then yeah, then I grew up in Jersey, went to undergrad in Maine at Bowdoin College, where I studied history and economics. Had an amazing 4 years there, and then went into consulting, management consulting in Boston at a kind of small boutique consulting firm, a little bit bigger now, called Charles River Associates. And then I went to Harvard Business School for my MBA, dropped out after a term, and this was in 1999. and helped my brother with a startup in Singapore. Um, and this was the idea was streaming video that would be funded by video ads, and was way too early. And then it never survived the dot-com crash. And we were terrible at executing, just absolutely horrendous founders.
And this was
Yeah,
early days, right? Like 90 to
99.
99.
Yeah, yeah. So this is yeah, this is before YouTube was like a big deal. I don't even know.
Hmm.
Might have been before YouTube was founded. It was around the time of broadcast.com. That was probably the closest comparable. And we basically copied broadcast.com and thought we could bring it to Asia and profit from that.
Hmm.
Then came back to HBS to finish my MBA after 9/11. Also happened after the dot-com crash of 2000. Then we had 9/11. I was like, okay, like let's we've had our startup adventure. I'm going to come back to school. Finished at HBS in 03. Interned at Microsoft in between my first and second year, and then joined Microsoft full time as a biz dev manager and Microsoft Office. And at that time, there was a push around Microsoft Office as a platform where third parties could kind of plug into Outlook and Word and Excel and PowerPoint and stuff. And so I worked on that. And then I quickly realized that I enjoyed the product, kind of coming up with ideas for these integrations more than the deal and the negotiation and the partner management. So then I switched over to product planning at MSN, and terrible timing. I mean, a lot of terrible timing in my career. Hopefully I've gotten all my bad luck out of my system, but I was hired by MSN in the internal kind of employee market to be the product planner for MSN's, which is at that time Microsoft's like online efforts, answer to MySpace. So it was a social networking initiative. And the argument was, well, we have Windows Messenger and MSN Messenger. So we have technically one of the largest social graphs in the world at that time. And why don't we facilitate ways for those people to interact beyond instant messaging, but they can post things and share pictures or blog or post short messages to each other publicly. And I was super excited about that. I was like, oh man, this is gonna be cool. And in fact, I think, yeah. So then I was about to join, and a week beforehand, then Gmail came out, and Gmail started really catching fire, as many of us remember. People were like buying Gmail invitations on eBay and stuff. And so there was an all hands on deck basically for MSN to save Hotmail, because at that time Hotmail had the inboxes for free. Hotmail was like 2 megabytes, the full inbox, not each message. And you could pay us $20 a year, I think, for the Hotmail Plus option, which had 20 megabyte
That's right.
inbox.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And if you didn't sign in at least once a month to the free, we would delete the account. But if you paid for Hotmail Plus, you could not be deleted. And this was a very good business because really at that time there was AOL, Yahoo, and Hotmail. And Gmail came out, and it had, I think I don't know if it was, I don't know how big, but it was way bigger than 2 megabyte inbox, probably like 100 megs or a gig or some crazy number. But Hotmail was architected in a different age, and was built on infrastructure that Hotmail as a startup had used. I think it was running on Oracle databases, on Sun hardware, and so like it was also like many generations of engineers, because Microsoft acquired Hotmail as a startup and then kind of milked it. Um, and so it's like, oh no, like this isn't built for that Gmail age. This was built in the Web 1.0 age, and it was slow, and you had to reload the whole page anytime you did anything. And it's full of ads. It was a pretty tough experience. So they said we got, and this was like a Bill G thing where they were like, we have to reinvent Hotmail. And so my original slotting for Microsoft Social Networking Initiative I got redirected to be the product planner, one of a couple other product planners also for Hotmail, the redesign. And we rebuilt the whole thing from bottom up and took a few years. But ultimately, when we launched it, it did win like some PC Magazine award for, you know, best webmail and had some cool features. I would say it probably stemmed the bleeding. When I worked on Hotmail, I had a few 100 million active users, and we were able to retain it. I think there's still hundreds of millions of people that use. I think it's now called Outlook.com or something. And then so I did that, and then after we kind of launched the beta for the new Hotmail, I was ready to go back to startup world because I kind of thirsted for fast moving decisions and that kind of thing. And
Hmm.
I was in a lot of like reviews at Microsoft. And at that time it was super hierarchical and yeah, just kind of a little bureaucratic. I think they've improved considerably under Satya, but this was in the uh, tail end of the Gates and early Ballmer kind of era. So I went to a startup, and this time, rather than me and my brother kind of fumbling around, this was a startup that was founded by the folks who did PageMaker, and then they did Visio. And Visio, they actually took public and then sold it. So double dipped on that one. So this was the third startup for that founding team. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And they were building a Web 2.0 calendar. And I was like, well, I'm coming from Hotmail. I know, calendar is a separate product, but I know about consumer kind of apps. And these guys were funded by Kleiner Perkins and August Capital, and they were kind of like the hot thing. So I joined and thought, okay, I'm going to learn how like the pros do it. And I did learn a lot, but it ended up and it was a super advanced Web 2.0 calendar that then this is before Google Calendar. And you could subscribe to other people's calendars, you can overlay people's calendars, you could publish a calendar, you could connect your work calendar with your personal calendar, and then subscribe to the Little League calendar. And then and it was a subscription service, so we charged per month. And then Google Calendar came out free, had most of what we had, really snappy UI, and pretty much the company Trumba, the startup, had an existential decision on how to compete, and ended up deciding to focus on B2B. And it's still operating. It's still actually like a nice little business, but it wasn't the. I think a lot of us were thinking it would get acquired by Microsoft, frankly, but it didn't. And so then I said, okay, we had a disagreement around where to take Trumba, and the founders decided to go in a particular direction, and I wasn't as excited about it. I wanted to go in a different direction.
Hmm.
But regardless, who knows who would have been right? But I decided that you can't be a PM in a startup if you don't have conviction about the strategy and the mission. And so I then left, and I was about to go to another startup, and then someone from Microsoft, this guy Tom Stocky, who was an intern at Microsoft when I was an early PM there, he had gone to Google, and I somehow reconnected with him, and I was asking him about Google, and honestly, I was primarily interested in getting compensation intelligence so that I can make sure that the startup offers I was getting were kind of like at least like fair.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up interviewing at Google and did not prepare at all for the interviews, but really loved every person I met. And I met with this guy, Orkut, who was the dude that created Google's first social networking effort called Orkut. And then I met with this guy, John Hankey, who was the CEO of Keyhole, which became like Google Earth. And, all these great folks. And I was like, wow, I was just very impressed by the caliber. Like, um, and to this day, I feel like Googlers are pretty capable, really, really bright, but pretty accessible and humble and self-aware. And that was very different than the kind of Balmer culture that I had seen
Mm-hmm.
from Microsoft, where it was more like very macho and kind of, you know, uh, you know, big kind of, how would I describe it? Very
I've heard
top down,
I've heard
yeah,
blustery described, right?
yeah, kind of,
Successful executives of that era.
yeah, pumping up your chest and beating your chest and really, you would know when you went into a Microsoft meeting at that time, you'd know who the director and who the VP and who the GMs were. I mean, it was very clear how they
Mm-hmm.
comported themselves. Whereas at Google, I remember the first meeting, I was like, there was this designer, Kevin Corpy, and he was, we were in a meeting, and there was an eng manager, senior eng manager, who's now a VP at Google, um, Scott Silver. And Kevin was like pushing back on Scott, like really openly on a particular, decision. I was thinking to myself, like, whoa, that guy is like much lower on the totem pole than Scott. Like, why is he? Is this okay? Like, is Kevin going to be around tomorrow? And then I realized, like, oh, that's just like a big cultural difference. So I ended up interviewing at Google and somehow got an offer. Um, and I say somehow because, like, at that time, and even to this day, there's a strong emphasis on uh, computer science undergrad degrees. And at that time, it was like Stanford consumers, computer science undergrad degrees.
I remember that. Yeah, it was the BS and CS from Stanford, and an MBA
Yeah.
was like, puts you at table stakes
Yeah. Yeah. And
for the
I didn't
time.
have that, like I studied history and economics at Bowdoin College, and so I did have the Harvard MBA, so that probably helped. And then I did have the reference from Tom Stocky, so that probably helped. And I guess I did okay in the interviews. But yeah, so I got an offer, and I was like, wow, I really like those Google folks. And I thought, wow, like I could probably learn and see how they do things there and then apply it to my own startups in future. So I joined. And at that time, they didn't even tell you what project you were going to join. They were just like, hey, here's your offer. You show up on this date, then we'll figure out what project needs you. And it was like joining the army. I think we give a little more clarity now, but at that time it was not. And so I was like, okay, cool. Like this is like rocket ship, like whatever. And then so I joined, and they put me on an ads product. Um, and at that time I had a different title. It was business product manager, which was a very small number of us, basically product managers who didn't have CS undergrads.
They made a new title for you guys.
Yeah. It was definitely like, uh, but in reality, we all did the same thing, and they ended up like killing that whole ladder. And now we just have product managers, and there's these some portion that don't have the CS undergrad. Um, So then I was there. I loved it. Amazing. Um, would have stayed for many, many years. But after 3 years, I was very focused on career growth and becoming a people manager because I was like, well, I'm not like fresh out of undergrad anymore. And I managed people at the failed startup and I've had many years now at multiple tech companies. Like I should be able to manage a few PMs. But unfortunately, at that time, Kirkland didn't have. It was too small of an office to have people managers in for PM in Kirkland. So all of us reported to people managers in Mountain View. And so the VP said, "Well, like if that's really important to you, you can move down to Mountain View, and then like there's tons of opportunities." Unfortunately, my wife had established a really thriving real estate business in Seattle, and we liked Seattle, so we were like, and there was this sort of like, oh, the Bay Area, like there was a certain Seattle kind of like pride, like I don't want to have to move down there, and you know, traffic and taxes and high real estate costs. So I didn't want to do it. And I had also had just asked my mom to relocate from New Jersey to Seattle. And I thought, oh, this will be terrible because she didn't want to move um, initially because she was like, you're gonna move again. And then I was like, no, 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 I won't. So uh was faced with the choice to remain a senior individual contributor at Google, or I think then I was looking at a VP of product role at Corbis, I think, and one of those. It was like the two kind of photo companies in Seattle. And there was this guy Brooks who I did a deal with when I was at Microsoft Office, and I knew he knew some people at Corbis or Getty, one of them too. And I said, hey, what do you think of this VP of product role? And he said, oh, well, if you're looking for a new adventure, like I'm at Marchex, you should talk to the Marchex team. And I said, well, what's Marchex? And
Who are these guys?
yeah, and he said, oh, we're trying to build out a strong product org, and just come and have coffee. So I met with at that time the COO and the head of engineering. I don't know what his title was, what Burke's title was, but with Pete and the Christodoulou and Burke, and I was enamored by Pete said something like, hey, like we're doing fine, but we're not winning championships. And at some point, you have to look at yourself and ask yourself, maybe we don't have the right leadership here. And I was like, well, that's very kind of self aware and kind of open. And, the argument was like, you've done it at Microsoft and Google, like bring some of that knowledge here about how to do product. So end up accepting a role and started out focusing on. I just realized this introduction is 23 minutes, so I'm gonna speed it up to get to other questions. Ended up going to Marchex. Eventually led all of product and design and program management there. And then after 3 years at Marchex, a couple things happened. One was there was a clear push to focus on this opportunity of pay for call kind of ad networks. Like advertiser pays per phone call. And as much as I understood that there was a need, I just wasn't convinced that that was a growing need. And so so that was a challenge. And again, like it's hard to be head of product when you don't believe in the company's product bet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing was I think there were probably some cultural differences in terms of how to make decisions and how people work together. And then the third thing was I had that entrepreneurial itch, and I was like, I want to do my own thing. And so I resigned from Marchex, and then had saved up enough money to kind of do my own entrepreneur in residence thing, and actually had an offer to be an EIR at a venture capital firm in Seattle called Madrona. And I was probably going to do it, but then all of a sudden, like I was just doing some like brainstorming and the design thinking and paper sketch, prototyping. And then a classmate of mine from HBS said, "Hey, I'm long time no talk. I now work at um, a family office, and you know, I see you're doing something new. We invest in early stage companies." I was like, "No, I don't have no early stage company. I just left my old job. I'm doing some like balsamic prototypes." And um, Mark, my classmate, was like, "Well, let's just talk." And I was like, "Okay." And then my brother um, said, "Hey, I'll invest." And I was like, "Okay, well, you're going to be investing in something that we don't know what it's going to be yet." And he's like, "Yeah, it's fine. Like, I'm in." And then Mark said, "Well, if you've already taken money from your brother, like, why don't we just join on the same terms?" And I was like, "What the hell's going on?" And so yeah, we raised like, I don't know, like 100 grand or something. And then I told Madrona, I was like, "Well, I'm probably not going to be EIR because I'm just going to go with this, and maybe we'll reconnect." And that began a long startup journey that took 4 years, two pivots, um, lots of two basically almost entirely different teams, 4 million in capital raised, I think, in total, over many rounds of mini sort of like super angel, like pre-seed. And but we didn't get market fit. It ended up becoming a case study on pivots at taught at Harvard for a few years. And we did sell the company's IP and customers ultimately did get acquired. So it was kind of a win. And we got a significant equity position in a much better funded startup that had about 14 million in capital. Unfortunately, they ended up going under a few years later. So then after that, was going to go to Amazon to say, well, done Microsoft, Google, let's see how Amazon does it. And then I checked in with Scott Silver, and I was like, "Hey man, I'm probably going to go to Amazon, but I was just curious if there's anything super interesting in Google and Kirkland right now." And then I think he may have forwarded it to Ariel, my first manager at Google. Um, and then Ariel, who was then I think VP of product management, had just joined YouTube, and he said, "Well, um, not sure about Kirkland, but how about Zurich?" And I was like, "What?" And I said, "No way. I can't even get my wife to move to the Bay Area. Like, there's no freaking way she's going to be down with Zurich." And then I mentioned to her at dinner. I was like, "Oh, I caught up with Ariel. He said, he's got something going on in Zurich. Isn't that crazy?" And she said, "Well, but maybe it might be interesting." Because at that point, we had been in Seattle for 13 years and we had the two kids. So she wasn't working in her real estate business anymore. And ended up saying, "What the hell? Like, if I can't do another startup and I can't raise another round of funding, rather than going straight into corporate, let's do an adventure of some sort." And that would be living and working in Europe. So ended up taking on a PM director role at YouTube in the Zurich, Switzerland office, and was there for 4 years. Lots of adventures there. And then came back a year ago to the States via the Bay Area. So finally moved to California. And now I work at Google Health, and I lead our clinical product development efforts. So 30 minutes later.
Well, Tom, you have a storied career, right? With a very wide range of experience. So, I
Worst
appreciate.
guest ever.
No, no, no. I mean, I appreciate it is interesting, right? Because I think product management, it seems it's a burgeoning field. I read somewhere that it's a popular, career transition target during these times, right? Folks are leaving what they're doing before, and
Mm,
what is interesting and compelling. And I know that some of it's a nascent field. A lot of the approach is just, like what you mentioned at kind of earlier days Google, right? Like, what's a good product manager? Is it a BS
mhm,
and CS plus an MBA or
mhm.
similar experience? Like, that forms the product management. And your experience demonstrates that highly successful product managers may not come from that explicit traditional experience, right? It's not you've done very well without that BS and CS background. You've gone from and experienced a range of kind of these larger companies and smaller companies. So it's great to hear like your story and how you came into it. And also, one of the things I took away from your descriptions is just how sometimes it feels like providence, right? It's like you stumble into an opportunity from a connection from long
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Quite serendipitous. And I think, I think life is like that. I think, as an example, my oldest son is applying to high schools right now. And depending on the day of the week, and one day I feel like, well, this is so crucial. Like we've got to help him get into a school that's amazing and transformational. And then on another day, I'm like, you know what? All these schools are fantastic, and he's gonna do fine in any of them. And it really won't make that much of a difference whether he goes to school A or B. And I think it's similar in career decisions. Like, I think we often think about, wow, this next job is going to determine the future, like the outcome of my life. And it's like, it'll be influential. And of course, you want to find a good fit, but it's not like that was the only job for you. And if you want to get really philosophical, I mean, there are people who would say, like, how you got married. Like, was it really one person out of 7 billion that you could have married? Like, I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But, so I think I've been pretty open to um, kind of opportunities as they've emerged and timing and serendipity. I mean, I definitely also do have a kind of point of view and objectives, but I think now I realize like you should plan, but some things like you can't control, and some things that you think you're controlling, you're really not.
Hmm. Yeah, and I know you didn't mention it in your introduction, but you've been doing some coaching on the side.
Yeah, I love it. I benefited from some coaching. Actually, the first time I engaged an external coach was when I was at Marchex and I was thinking about leaving. And I thought, man, I can't talk about this with my manager because they have a particular point of view. And my
Hmm.
spouse, like, Wendy's amazing, but like, um, she has her own point perspective, and she's not in tech management and career kind of management. So I engaged with a career coach, Jane Faulkner, who was great. And then when I um, came back to Google, I had help from a executive coach because we were trying to kind of turn around a culture and a team. And but I've always enjoyed with my friends, even from like college days. My good buddy Phil would always say, "Man, whenever I hang out with you, I feel like either this is a job interview because I asked him like, well, where do you want to be in 5 years? Or like you forced me to think about things that maybe I wasn't thinking about." And I love that kind of stuff. I love the guided introspection. I love giving time to ourselves and to each other to just hit the pause button. Do not freak out about what's urgent, and just zoom out and think about what's important for you. And give yourself a beat to think about what you've learned and reflect, because most modern companies do not give you that time. Like in theory, your manager can do that, and you can find mentors, but it requires like a lot of effort, and mentors are busy and they might meet with people like once twice a year kind of thing, but sometimes you need a little more time. So I started doing coaching formally at Google through an internal program. We got some training, and now I do coaching for a lot of kind of middle managers at Google.
Hmm.
And then I thought, oh, maybe someday I'll work with people outside of Google, and it'll be kind of like a fun little side hustle, and I'll earn a little money to buy some gadgets from time to time, or take the family out to dinner, extra time, and put up a little website, and post it on like Facebook and LinkedIn. Hey, I've been doing coaching at work, but if anybody needs help, and surprisingly, like, I got a lot of people reaching out and saying, oh, I'd really like to work with you. And so yeah, I've been doing that kind of like on the weekends, just like a few hours um a week kind of thing. I really enjoy it. I think what I like is and I still get coaching from other people, is I like having a safe space where I can talk about my concerns and my issues and my objectives, and I don't have to sell. I'm not trying to impress my manager. I'm not
Mm.
trying to inspire my team. I'm not trying to be like empathetic with my wife. I can talk about what I care about, just me, with no other objective. And that's really refreshing and empowering and liberating, and can be super insightful when the coach kind of asks you to challenge your thinking a little bit. And so, yeah, definitely enjoy doing that. And I also just volunteered with the local community college to see if they needed help with teaching their business 101 class. Because I feel like, I don't know, like I've done decent in my career, and I'm very grateful for the financial kind of resources I have. And I want to give back too, and coaching is a way to do that. Obviously, it's not free, but it's way lower than my official market rate is, if I were to just try and get promoted faster at Google, as an example. And the community college stuff, like, I think they pay $70 an hour. And I was just like, Don't worry about it. Just put that towards like a scholarship or something."
Yeah.
But, like, you reach a point in your life where it's not all about landing achievements. And I think, if you've been fortunate, like, I feel there's an obligation to give back.
Yeah, that's Tom, that's awesome. And I really resonate with some of your statements about, you know, when you're career coaching, uh, taking a beat, right? And being generous with your time to other people. And especially your kind of end comment there about having a space where you're not having to sell.
Mm,
That is product management, in my experience as well, has been, it's a lot of things at a lot of times, but yeah, often you're trying to represent whoever's not in the room in the best of your capability, be it engineering or design, and yourself, and you can just, it can be not, it's not facetious, but it's definitely, you're always projecting something, and that can be, it could be a little tiring after a while. So it's great to
yeah,
hear. I think coaching, like you mentioned back in the days when you first engaged on it, can be seen sometimes as, this is not something you want to talk about, right? You're always great. You're selling yourself. I don't need advice. I don't need coaching. And I think as you've seen in kind of in your clientele and folks reaching out to you, I think it's greatly being seen as no, this is a good thing now, right? This is an important thing to have that's gonna be helpful for our happiness and success.
yeah. And a lot of people reach out, and they think they're buying expert advice. And what I say is like, well, I mean, if you want me to tell you what you should do, like, that, I could tell you, and that's a very short conversation. But the real value is just giving you space and prompts, and sort of the room to discover what's somehow inside of you, in your subconscious, that 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 you just need help kind of seeing, you know in more with more clarity.
Hmm.
And some of those things are hard. They don't naturally come up. I'll give you an example. It wasn't a coaching session, but I recently, this last couple weeks, since it's the end of the year, I've been reconnecting with colleagues at YouTube, the previous kind of unit that I was in. And I was actually talking to Scott, the same Scott Silver, who is really freaking lights out smart and very candid and open and supportive. And so I said, "Hey man, like I feel like I did a good job at YouTube, but I don't feel like I knocked it out of the park. And here's what I think where I struggled. Here's where I think I could have been better." And I just wanted to kind of get your sense, like what was your interpretation? And like it's important to take time to have those conversations. Like, and it's not as part of a performance review process because those perf cycles are done. Like whatever feedback you already gave it in the official record. But I wanted to hear it kind of a year later so that I can apply those learnings to my new role at Google Health and be a better leader, you know? And so I think coaching is one of the ways. It's like a personal trainer. Like, can you exercise on your own? Yeah, you can. But sometimes having someone working with you just is a different dynamic. So yeah, I enjoy it. I wish maybe someday, like when I retire, I might just do coaching, you know, for half the week. It'd be awesome.
Yeah, that's we can look ahead to retirement Tom, and how many people he can help. But yeah, it sounds like some of the personal connections you've made in your career have been really influential, right? Folks that you've,
Mm,
again, back to serendipity, um, that you've met and have come to have, what seems like a really outsized influence on kind of
mm-hmm.
career trajectory, and at least your approach, and the way you go about um, product management. What's Would you have any advice to sort of newer PMs or folks kind of just you know trying to make their way through corporate life in the tech space? How do you make these connections? Is there um, certain things we should do, certain outlooks we should have? Because I know kind of the default position is just everyone's got to hustle, hit your OKRs, and just work, and
Yeah.
it's not, these sort of things aren't being emphasized, at least on the institutional scale.
Yeah. Um, it's interesting. These personal kind of connections for me have been very influential. At the same time, I am not the kind of person that remembers your birthday and goes out of the way my way to have like quarterly lunches. Um, I'm as my wife will tell you, I'm terrible at that kind of stuff. Um, but I think one of the things that has helped with personal relationships that have been very strong for me is I try to go in with a lot of transparency and honesty and maybe willingness to be vulnerable and say, "Hey, um, I'll give you an example. Even like this week at work, so I was kind of sensing that I need to work on some areas to build more trust with elements of the team. And I had a conversation with someone in the kind of that manages another team. I was like, "Hey, I feel like I'm not really landing my message with your reports, and I'd like to figure out how I can like what's behind that and what I can do to be more effective there." And I think like people appreciate when you're not coming in pointing fingers and blaming people, and you're really willing and open to self-improvement, and you're willing to act on advice you get too. And that they know that you're trying your best and that you're trying to do the right thing, and that you're trying to maintain high kind of uh, ethical and sort of honest standards, and that you're trying to be positive and helpful to other people. And I think it comes back to you, you know. So some of the key elements of building great relationships at work and in your career, I think, is one, like, deliver for people. So, like, I still catch up when I'm in town with my first manager out of undergrad, and I think he knows I work pretty hard for him, and that I also that I respect him and I value his input on stuff. And so I think one is like, if you kind of do your part and deliver and add value, that's table stakes. It's harder to build a relationship like if people feel like you didn't do your part or you weren't kind of holding your end of the bargain or carrying your weight or whatever.
Hmm.
And then the second thing is to be kind of truly open to input and act on it. And then I think the third thing is like ask for help when you need it, you know? So, those are I don't think there's any kind of magical stuff to it. All I would say is like it does not require the super proactive kind of network building stuff that people do that I totally am impressed with. Like I could never do that, but I've been able to still build good relationships, despite that. And the other thing I think I try to do is if people ask me for help, I try and respond as much as I can. And I just feel like, maybe that'll come back to me or maybe it won't, but
Hmm.
it's just a good practice.
Yeah, I remember in the first Fireside PM interview that you had with Ariel, your first manager at Google.
Hmm.
Uh, he was describing folks where, if it wasn't in their OKRs, they wouldn't even talk to you, right? And that's kind of the opposite approach, where it's,
Yeah.
it is that I am hustling and heads down, and will perhaps achieve personal success here in this realm, but maybe missing out on some of these opportunities to
Yeah.
build connections. And these seem, again, just going back to your experience, right, just so valuable in opening unexpected opportunities for you. Uh, to go back and have the opportunity to join Google at a time when they seemingly have stolen your thunder twice in terms of various product opportunities, right? And
Uh-huh.
you're able to
Yeah.
do that on a connection that you had made previously at Microsoft.
Yeah. Yeah. Those yeah, it all kind of worked out, and it's been a fun ride. I think I'm still looking for my massive win. Um, but like maybe the thing I'm working on now will be that thing. Who knows?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, it looks like we have a question in the
Oh yeah.
comments.
Yeah, here we go. From Vidor. Is that what you're thinking?
Hmm.
How do you judge for product sense instinct in entrepreneurs and PMs? Um, Couple things. One is if they have a demonstrated track record for working on products that have succeeded, that is always helpful. Now, there are plenty of PMs out there who just got on the right bus kind of accidentally, but like if you're interviewing someone and they were early PM at Airbnb or the early PM at, Slack or something, you're like, well, they must have done something right. In reality, like, who knows? Maybe the founders made those calls, but whatever. Like, if you're looking at two candidates and one was an early PM at, some successful startup or successful product, and another has a string of products that have not been successful, like that, that is an edge. The second thing is in the interview itself, I try and uh, discern how logical and kind of thoughtful people are about anything, like why they made a job change or why they decided to work on a product. Or I'll ask them, like, well, what was a product feature you worked on that you were really kind of excited about? And I try and understand and listen for, like, well, how did they develop these hypotheses, and how did they um, kind of discover these insights, and how did they translate that into a product idea, and then how did they actually execute it, on how they landed, and how did they measure success, and how did they iterate, and all that kind of thing. And then I think the third thing is sometimes we'll ask people like, hey, tell me about a product that you're really impressed with. And I just try, and there's never like a right answer. But what I'm looking for is that they're pretty methodical, but also very thoughtful about why such and such a product is successful. So it's beyond like, well, I love the Roomba because it cleans my house, but it's more like, well, I'm really impressed with the whoever created it, like had this insight on how painful it is to do vacuuming, how much time it takes, how physically, kind of annoying it can be, and you've got these wires, and the founders obviously combined this problem with this technology solution, which was wireless and self kind of driven vacuums. And then there's all these amazing touches that they did around the voice kind of interface, and the scheduling and all this kind of thing. And so you're like, okay, yeah, that guy or that gal is thinking like a product manager. Like they don't walk in and look at a product the way most people look at a product. They really try to understand, like, oh, what was the, maybe that's one of the things. It's like, what was the PM for this successful product? How did they arrive at this? And it probably wasn't dumb luck. There were some key principles and hypotheses, and so those are some of the ways. And but ultimately, I will say, what right or wrong, that track record um plays a very heavy part. And as an interviewer, you try and mitigate that bias, because if you just look for a bunch of logos on a resume that you recognize, like, that person may not have really the internal innate capabilities that you're looking for. And similarly, if there's a person who didn't have a bunch of recognizable logos, like, it may have nothing to do with their capabilities. So that's where you try, if you're a good interviewer, you really try and challenge those assumptions, and give the person who maybe your intuition doesn't have, like, the ideal pattern recognition, you give them many opportunities to show you that they do. And then for the person who you're like, oh, I know all these brand names, like, and I like this person, like, then you actually go out of your way to challenge those assumptions, and make them prove that they really have what you think they have. But yeah, those are just some early thoughts there.
Awesome, Tom. Just to follow up on that, you mentioned, so with the question was about product sense, you talked a little bit about, um, thinking like a product manager, looking for that in candidates you're talking to. Is there anything else that you look for in either early, brand new to PM, early stage, or maybe sort of middle, mid career? What other characteristics do you think make a good PM, and you're trying to suss that out in the interview?
Um, Clear thinking, clear communications, uh, clear demonstrated impact, um, passion for the problem we're trying to solve. Um, those are probably some of the things that I look for. I think previous Fireside PM interview we had with Omar Shaheen, he had much more profound things he looks for. It was like curiosity, passion, and grit. I like that too. Um, but yeah, like, you're looking for a mini CEO that can work with a bunch of people that they have no control over, that is multilingual, that can kind of hold their own with engineers, with designers, with researchers, with marketers, with biz dev people. And then also, I think, depending on, actually for all stages of the product, customer obsession and the ability not just to be obsessed about the customer, but also to develop very um, very key insights into that customer's experience, environment, motivations, pain, um, you know, just really becoming an expert in the user and the customer. In some ways, I feel like it might be more valuable to know your customer extremely well and their environment well than your own product. And I know that that's a little bit counterintuitive because you're like, wait a minute, you're the PM. You should know your product like the back of your hand. Well, yeah, but if you don't know the customer that well, like who knows if this product is really solving the problem for them as best
Hmm.
as it could. Obviously, if you can do both, then that's ideal.
I have a little notebook here, just like James Liffin. I jotted down multilingual. I think
Yeah,
that's a good one. I think that is, that is a key skill. PM is in between everyone, and you need to sound sensical to everyone,
yeah,
and you need to win their trust, and that is
yeah.
a different tack to it. We have another question in the chat
Oh
from
yeah, from
Only One
only one
Swami.
Swami. I believe L7 SPM at Google can have direct reports. How does an IC look to gain management responsibilities? Um, yes, L7s at Google can have direct reports, and L6s in some cases can as well. For my situation, when I was in Kirkland, there was just a thing at that time where there weren't enough PMs in Kirkland in 2009 to have a manager of multiple PMs all co-located there. That's now very different. But to answer your question, how does an IC look to gain management responsibilities? Well, the first thing is to be an amazing IC and to be, strongly exceeding expectations as a individual contributor. Um, that's kind of like if you're struggling as an IC and then you ask your manager to have people management scope, they'll be like, "What are you doing? Like, you need to get your stuff together." If on the other hand, you're kicking ass as an IC and your manager's like, "You're doing fantastic, da da da. Let's talk about your growth." Then I think it's a great time to talk about, well, I would like to develop people management skills and I'd like to help there. And I know it's really hard, and so I want to kind of build that muscle. Um, And to your point about stars aligning, it is an issue to the extent that even if you're kicking butt as an IC and you're ready to be a people manager, if the org isn't growing or doesn't have enough kind of moving around of talent, that there aren't a lot of manager roles, then that could be a challenge. Um, at Microsoft, everybody was a manager of like there were a lot of layers, and I think Google has tried to reduce that. And I think we found that when you have this I formation, if you have a manager of just one person, like it doesn't really work that well. Um so stars aligning reminds me of advice I got from someone I was interviewing with at Amazon before I came to YouTube. And I said, wow, I think at that point she might have been a VP or something, but I was like, wow, you have been on a roll. Like at least seems like every 2-3 years you're getting promoted, and you're just like, uh, how did you? What's the driver for that success? And she said, oh yeah, I worked hard and I do a great job, but to be honest with you, joining AWS when it was a very small thing and just hanging on for dear life as it was growing uh, means that when as it's growing and they need like more senior people, they look around and you're one of the most senior people, you know. So that is something that I try and remind career coaching clients about too. Can you hear me, Wes? Can you hear me, Wes? Uh-oh. I'm gonna hold on. Wes. Wes Woo? Okay, hold on this. Activate mobile hotspot.
Turning Wi-Fi hotspot on.
Oh, only one Swami says, can hear Tom, Wes frozen. Okay. So let me finish my story and then hopefully I see Wes has rejoined. Hey Wes.
Hey, sorry, I think my internet flickered a little bit. Sorry about
Oh,
that.
no worries, man. I'm now on my mobile hotspot because I wasn't sure if it was me or you, but
I'm
can you hear
also
me
my
okay?
mobile hotspot. Yeah, I can hear you.
All right. Well, I don't have the power of T-Mobile, but whatever provider I'm using seems to be working okay. So anyway, yeah, I was talking about so she was basically saying if you join an organization that's growing leaps and bounds, like the stars start aligning. And that's true not just for becoming a people manager, but just growing in your career in general. If you're in a business that is growing in and of itself, like a lot of sins are forgiven. There's probably some number of okay PMs that join some unicorn thing at the right time and are doing fantastic. And there's probably some number of terrific PMs that are in a business that outside of their control is just not growing that much. And they're not going to grow in their own careers as fast. And that's just like you could be an amazing ball player. And if you join, the Patriots, you're probably going to do pretty good. And if you join some other team, even if you're really great, like it may not happen for you. So,
Hmm.
stars aligning is a big one. And part of the stars aligning is what team are you joining? And is there kind of a tailwind and a gravitational pull forward that you can benefit from, or are you going to try and save this thing all on your own?
Yeah. Only one Mommy had a quick follow-up question as well. Have you ever seen folks who've gained direct reports and choose to go back to IC?
Yes, I have actually. Um, there are some people who love to go deep into the details and kind of understand the full stack of the solution. And then there are other people who um, are very happy kind of staying a little bit higher elevation and looking at the broader kind of boxes on the chart. And maybe they like the people management stuff and they don't see that as a requirement, but it's actually something they enjoy doing. They get pleasure from seeing other people succeed, uh, with some help. And so I have seen it. And I think it's important to recognize where you are. And that touches on a broader thing, which is like you want to work on your strengths and your weaknesses, and you want to address gaps in your capabilities. That at the same time, there's a point where you are best served, in my opinion, by putting yourself in situations where your strengths are what that organization needs the most. And the opposite is you put yourself in a situation where your weaknesses, the areas where you're not strong, is the areas that organization needs someone to be super strong. So if we tie this back to um, the whole business product manager and OCS degree thing, like if I were in a team where that team required me in my role to really go down deep and like write code with people, like I'm not going to be successful in that role. And there's nothing I can do. Like I'm not going to suddenly become a world class, back end, ML developer. Like that's not going to happen. And I think that's part of your career success is you're never going to find a role where everything you're awesome at is exactly what the team needs. But, as much as you can, if it's like a 70% overlap with what you're awesome at, and there's 30% that you need to kind of just like build some more muscle tissue, then that's great. But if it's the other way around and 70% of what the company needs or the team needs is what you kind of are not great at, and the stuff that you love doing that you're great at, they kind of don't really value or don't need that much, then that's probably not a great fit. And so same thing with the IC stuff. If you love to be an IC, find a team that values senior ICs and principal kind of product managers, and don't join a team that is desperately in need of adding organizational structure and adding a management layer, and vice versa.
Yeah, Tom, that's great advice. I think we also have Kevin Corpy in the chat. Shout out to Kevin Corpy. You got name dropped earlier in
Yeah.
the stream.
His ears must have been ringing when he was giving Scott Silver some grief, and I was like, "What the fuck? That guy's a director, bro." But Kevin Corpy doesn't. He's a direct guy too. So, and it all worked out well. So everybody it was good. It was healthy.
I know we're a little bit over on our scheduled time. Thank you to the chat for dropping in and asking some questions of our esteemed host Tom, who's flipped over to the interviewee chair today. You want to close it out, Tom? Any sort of parting thoughts on PMing, career, get a career coach, talk to Tom Leung? What's your advice?
Well, first of all, thank you for hosting, and I know it's actually taxing and takes time and energy, and you have plenty of other things to do on a Saturday morning.
This is tough. Everyone, Tom, give Tom some love. This is a hard job to make sure you ask questions, keep it moving. Tom does it flawlessly every week. Meanwhile, here I'm like, I got my notes going on.
No, you did a great job. So thank you for that. I'm glad that we were able to make this happen. In terms of parting thoughts, I think for PMs out there, I never I am constantly reminded of the importance of focusing on a customer problem that is big enough and worth solving, and that you are solving in a fundamentally better way than their current alternatives. It is amazing to me when I think about every single product that I've worked on that did not grow as fast as I thought it should have. I always come back to, what the hell problem were we really solving? You know? And if we were customers, would we have used this thing? And would we have paid for it? Or would we have invested our time into it? And would it have been that much better for us? And it's so incredible because PMs, like, we're trained to be customer focused and, define requirements and have these, critical user journeys and all this stuff. But somehow, I think there's like this inertia. I think a lot of the problem solving focus starts when a project initiates, but then somehow the project takes on a life of its own. And either like we don't have time to think about the customer problem, we assume we're solving the appropriate problem and it's big enough, or there's some bias unconsciously to not ask those hard questions because of sunk costs. So that's the first thing I would say. Really be super crisp on who you're solving this problem for. What is this what problem is this? Why is it a problem? How big of a problem is it? And why is your thing like that much better? And it can't just be like a slightly better mousetrap. And certainly, like if you're doing a startup, the bar is even higher. But I would say even for an established company, if you want to build a feature that's going to enhance growth, like you can't just polish your product to like next level of growth. You've got to like really make some bigger moves, in my opinion. And then the second thing is like, yeah, give yourself some time. You could use a coach, but you don't have to if you don't want to. Like you could find maybe a friend that is willing to put some time in and have a recurring kind of conversation where it's but you have to be selfish where you say like this time is just going to be about me. It's about my needs, my concerns, my hopes, my ambitions, my learnings. So I think giving yourself time for that introspection is really crucial. Otherwise you get into this rhythm of just trying to get promoted and moving up to the next level, and you're not even sure why the hell you're doing it, and it'll surface. That lack of clarity will actually reduce your impact and your morale and your kind of longevity. So that would be advice number two. And then the third advice is like enjoy the ride. Like now I've been around long enough that I can look back and say, wow, I've done a lot of things, and like I mentioned, none of them have been the $1 billion outcome that I wanted. But you also need to know the odds of you being the founding PM for $1 billion business are small. And if you go through your career like constantly feeling like if I don't have that, I'm a failure. Like that's not great. Um, and you could argue it actually would reduce your chances of finding that big success because you're so tight and you're so like kind of wound up. You should stay hungry and you should try and do amazing things. But like I was telling my son, like if you get into a bunch of high schools, great. If you get in a bunch of great colleges, like great, good for you. But like that doesn't define you. What defines you is, are you constantly learning? Are you finding your state of flow? Are you acting with high integrity? Are you putting out your best effort and being a good person and leaving the world a little better than you found it? And if you do all those things, then oftentimes everything else just comes for free.
Yeah, Tom, that is advice to our children. Looks like it ends up being really good career advice as well. Just my
Yeah.
takeaways from our conversation, which perhaps feels like a free session of Tom Leon career coaching, is just take a beat, just reflect on kind of what's going on, and like Ziad, who we both worked with in the previous Fireside PM interview, said, product management is we get paid pretty well to do a pretty fun job. So I think just remember to have fun. I can feel like we get dragged down into are we hitting OKRs, especially during now, which is planning time.
Hmm.
But yeah, just take a breather and reflect on the things going on.
Right on, Wes. Good summary. I think we should end the conversation at that, and really appreciate you coming on the show and being a host. Hey, if people wanted to follow you, are you active on social media? How can they learn more about Wes?
Not really. I should probably do a better job. You can just follow me on, I guess, on LinkedIn. I don't really post a lot. I'm just doing the other part of heads down PMing. I should probably.
Shipping
Uh,
product, huh? Yeah, good for you. All right, Wes. Thanks, buddy. Have a great weekend.
all right. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, guys.
See ya.